Welcome. Today we're looking at Cult of the Cave Crickets, which is a level 2 DCC Adventure by Jeff Demers, published by Darkstar Adventures. All the art, layout, and editing was done by Casey Lynch, and the cartography was done by Mark Moreau. A few things first, I did receive the PDF as a review copy, so I just want to make sure that's very clear. The Kickstarter is also going live on July 2nd. I'm also calling this a first impressions, not review, because people who've watched me for a while will know I don't like calling things a review unless I've actually played or run them. But with the Kickstarter coming up soon, I thought I would sort of just go through it and see what I thought of the overall product just from reading it and seeing what I thought about it. I've played and run many DCC adventures out there, so I do tend to have a pretty good idea at this point of what I think will work and not work just from reading, but I do think it's good for people to always, see what it's like in play, just so they have a better idea, because sometimes things will really surprise you in play versus just from reading it. So before we get into spoiler territory, so I found this adventure to be pretty cool. It is very sort of horror themed and very H.P. Lovecraft themed. The setup especially feels very much like a Call of Cthulhu adventure. I don't know if the creators play a lot of COC or other horror investigation games, but I do think that is to the benefit of this adventure, because I will get into the more details in a little bit here, but I have found that the overall structure is very much more of an investigation game with a dungeon crawl, sort of backbone going throughout it. And one thing I really like about this is that it is not stingy on giving you clues as to what's going on. I think from very early on, there is stuff to really grab onto it for the players. And I think also as they'll go through, if they are being perceptive, if they are being more investigative and they're actually trying to put clues together, they will have a better idea of what they're up against or what's going on throughout the dungeon, which I think is actually really good. And the reason why I say that's from more of an investigation horror background, or like at least that's how it feels to me, is because that's something you really need to do in those kinds of games, so that players aren't spinning their wheels and aren't, getting really frustrated, not knowing what to do next. With the dungeon crawl, it's not so bad because you can just sort of go through different rooms or find different places. But having those extra elements that sort of give you more of an idea what's going on, I think is very important. Because I would say that, like, most dungeon crawls have some sort of mystery element to them. Part of it is the exploration, wondering what's going on. This has a bit more of a direct investigation happening as part of it, but I have found a lot of times, like, some of those games really don't want to give information to the players. They're very obtuse, the information they do get, and the amount of times you'll have a player be like, what the fuck? How was I supposed to get that from that? That makes no sense at all. Or that's not nearly enough information for me to get that. Or, oh, there was a lot of information, but it was behind 2 secret walls. And there's none of that here, which I think is actually really good. The overall story, and I'll keep this pretty brief so I don't get into too much spoilers, but this is like from the beginning, really. There's a few different adventure starts. I would say go with the one that the book wants to go with, the main one, because there's the alternate starts that I think are either for groups that, the main start doesn't work for, or if you already have a campaign where it's like, okay, these ones will just work better than this main one. But essentially the main one is there is an expedition party from a college, which is, already very like COC and like Lovecraftian. Things have gone horribly wrong because they've gone into the mountains to go check out this thing that's happened. And basically the players are tasked with going to find them and, rescuing them and doing whatever they can. And the reason why, and again, this is the reason why I don't think it's a spoiler just yet, because this happens right at the beginning. The person who gives them this information is one of the expedition members who is escaping from it because, whatever happened, which I won't get into, has gone wrong, and they've asked for their help. And an element I really like that I don't know if I've seen before is that character actually writes down and gives them a list of all the people in the expedition to find and sort of mark off, dead or alive. And there actually is a sheet in the book that you can print off or, copy and put up on your online game if you're doing that. But I really like that because I feel like that gives a really, like, solid goal outside of just the exploration. I know they're already going to look for them, but I think having that little bit of that tactile part, I think actually does go a long way. So I do think that list is a very neat idea, and I think that I would like to see it in play, see how it works, because I think personally with my own group, if I was running it for them, I think they would love passing it around, sort of being like, okay, this guy's dead, okay, this person, is something going on with this person? Like, we haven't found this person yet, they ran off this way, like, are they a traitor? Is there something going on here? Are they already dead? So I think there's some pretty fun stuff with that. So that's the overall task, is just going to the mountains, trying to find this camp, this group of people, these researchers, and seeing if you can rescue them. And it's a pretty simple one that then goes, as most of these tend to go, into a different direction that goes kind of out of control for the players quite a bit, I would say. Overall, I think it's a pretty good setup. I will talk about it more in the spoiler section, so I'm not going to get into it too much now. What I want to talk about right now is the writing, layout, and art. Firstly, I think the art in the book is really, really good. I like it a lot. I think it's very thematic. I'm going to show some of it later in the spoiler section because I don't want to give too much away. All the art is very tonally consistent. The style is consistent. I think it really fits with this sort of very oppressive and isolated and dark adventure, and I think it goes along with it really well. And there's one piece in particular which I'll show later on that I'm a huge fan of, that I really, really, really like. And then of course there's also the cover of the adventure, which I think is just a really, really fun cover. You have that sort of like 50s, B movie font of Cult of the Cave Crickets, for the whole title. You have a very sort of pulpy kind of vibe to this whole thing, with the researcher on the ground, the big bug just sort of right over him. One thing I do find interesting, though, is that in the book, and also, of course, because it's DCC, that is medieval, or at least, fantasy, sort of more adventuring, and that is what's in the book. But I find that the cover has what looks like a guy who looks like a Lovecraftian character, he looks like a researcher, from a college, but it looks like he's from the modern day, or the 20th century, at least. So I found that very interesting. I don't know if that was just when they were talking to the artist, if that was just something that, there was some wires crossed, or if they just wanted to really go for that vibe of, no, we're going for more of, a Lovecraftian thing. It's DCC, but this is, more the vibe than anything else. But overall, I think the art is fantastic. I think my only complaint with this is that I think that bug should absolutely have Mothman's ass, but, not all art can be perfect. It's just the way it goes. But jokes aside, I think it's great. It's going for the classic orange and blues that, you'll see on every Disney and Marvel poster out there these days. But I think it looks really good here. It's got great art style, and I think it does sell the vibe pretty well of what's in the book. As for the layout's very clean. It's the DCC layout, which I have already expressed many times that I don't think I need to keep kicking this horse. I'm not the biggest fan of. I think this one does it pretty well. I do still think in some places, there could have been a few sentences that could have been shaved off. There could have been some things that were in bullet points, things that are a little bit easier to sort of scan through when you're at the table looking for it versus, just reading through casually outside of the game. But there's nothing here that really stands out to me as bad. I think overall, it's keeping everything very clean. It keeps things in a good order. So I have no real complaints there. It really is just one of those things where if you are into the DCC style, you'll like it. If you've sort of fallen off like I have, then you kind of know what to expect, and it's not a deal breaker. It is what it is. And I mean, it's working for DCC. It's one of the, bigger OSR fantasy games, whatever you want to call it, out there. So it is obviously doing okay, and maybe I'm just wrong about it. As for the writing, I think it does a good job. I think it's very easy to read. I didn't have trouble going through it. It wasn't a slog of okay, you're, overly staying your welcome here with way too much information like that. I found that it flowed pretty well. It was very light. And so that's why I like in my dungeons, is I just want you to give me the information I need to know. If you want to add a little bit of flavor or a little bit of context, that's, always good to have, but I don't need too much. And I appreciate that for this. And also, because it's such a Lovecraftian-inspired adventure, there's also the word that sometimes people will really put those archaic or very, large sort of Lovecraftian words that, sure, it adds to, the adventure, but overall can be pretty annoying when you have to go reach for a dictionary just to find out what something means. I also think this adventure would work really well in the same sort of world as Doom of the Savage Kings. So if you are doing a campaign with Doom, you might need to change some stuff, the college might need to change to I don't know, some scalds, or, just might change to a different adventuring group or sort of expedition, or there might be some Lovecraftian things you might need to change that are a little bit too different from the tone of Doom. But because this also takes place in the mountains, also has a lot of horror themes, is also pretty horrible and dark. I feel like if you are doing a campaign that's based out of Herat from Doom of the Savage Kings, I do think that this would actually be a pretty solid adventure to throw in there as part of your Overland, campaign. And the last thing I want to say on the layout and writing side is that I really like how the characters have been done here. One thing that's really nice is that when you get to a character, when they are on that page, they just have their pronouns, their alignment, their profession, and also how to roleplay them. And that's just in small brackets next to their name, so it's very, very easy to do. One thing I was kind of worried about because I thought it would take from COC, and it's something I don't super love. I don't even love that much in COC, but I think it works better there. But I've seen other dungeon crawls do it. I've seen other DCC adventures do it, and I'm not really a big fan of it. I think there are some instances where it can work if you do it well and if you have a really, really good reason for doing it. But I don't like sections of like the dramatis personae, which is just like the cast of characters. And it's like, okay, but these characters are only going to be here for so long. A lot of them I'm going to fight, or, you know, they really don't have that much going on with them anyway. Like, this is not that important to have this. I get that you got art made for them. I get that you like these characters, but like, you really didn't need all this stuff here. So I'm very glad that that was not the case here. I really did think that if this was taken from COC as inspiration or other games like that, that there would be a whole like, oh, here's 3 pages, big art, stats, here's their whole background story, everything about them, and that stuff's unnecessary. So I'm very happy that it was very much cut down, utilitarian, and very easy to read through. But with that, we are getting into spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled, get the fuck out of here. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys the sort of Cliff Notes version, the summary of this adventure, and then I'm going to give you guys some highlights of things I like. So basically, very, very simple adventure in my opinion, but it's very cool where it ends up going. There is this, like, mushroom demon, and these cave crickets have been eating, you know, off this mushroom demon, and they've sort of grown into this cult of cave crickets that, you know, worship this big mushroom demon. There was a meteor that crashed here that is the whole reason why the expedition came out here in the first place, these mountains. That meteor actually has a portal inside of it that sort of leads to, like, the hellish mushroom dimension, and essentially the cult wants to bring forth their demon to crack open this meteor and summon forth a plague of mycelium and mushroom madness across the globe. Very classic, you know, just kind of like, oh, big evil, big ancient evil coming to fuck everything up. But I do really like the way it's done. I also like the flavor of it. I think whenever you have, you know, fungi or mushroom sort of content, I think it makes things a lot of fun. I am giving you sort of like, I guess, the cleaned up version because I will say a lot of descriptions are pretty gross in a good way. So the meteor has already crashed, and the expedition party that the players are set off to go find are actually after the meteor. They are looking for it. They did find parts of it. They did find things that were, you know, very wrong. They did come in contact with both the cave cricket cult and also a lot of like that sort of gross fungal stuff that is around this area. And essentially what's happening with them is they are throughout the dungeon. Some of them are already dead, and some of them you can save or help. And there's one at the end who's going to be sacrificed to the big sort of meteor portal thing by the cult and the mycelium demon. That's overall the pretty big summary. The players will first sort of go through to a camp, and this is where it does get very COC, and this is where I was very impressed with it, because at this camp, there are a lot of clues as to what's going to come next throughout the adventure. Not like next is the next room, but like as in next, more narratively that's going on throughout the dungeon. So I do think that you should, if you are running this, tell your players, like, hey guys, this is more of an investigation game, like, you know, ask questions, look for things, really sort of nail it home. I think if you have people who've been doing dungeon crawling for a while, they'll know to do that anyway, because dungeon crawling and investigation have a lot of, you know, crossover in how you play them. But I do think that'll be good to sort of push your players into that direction, sort of prime them for that kind of gameplay, because I have run more investigative DCC games in the past, and I did not prime the players properly for that. And it's in some places end in their death. In other places just end in a very unsatisfying game where they weren't really looking for stuff and things didn't really go anywhere. But in this camp, there are a few different, you know, clues and, you know, notes and all kinds of things that will lead the players down into these caves. They'll go through these horrid mushroom caves with different creepy crawly creatures and gross mushroom creatures, and that will eventually lead them through those caves to deeper caves, and then they'll come up to essentially the big meteor sort of ritual going on that is happening. So it's very fun. I do like that stuff a lot, but I do think that because it's a pretty classic adventure in terms of its, you know, overall structure, but very well done in terms of the investigation aspects, I will mostly just talk about highlights, because I think going from room to room, I think will not, you know, necessarily do it justice, or at least not really give you much in the way of stuff that you haven't seen already if you're already somebody who's watching DCC videos. So one of the encounters I really liked is the Whispering Mycelium, which essentially is just this big curtain of mushrooms that are sort of whispering to the players, and the players can come up to it to try and listen in. The Whispering Mycelium actually does have some good information for the players. It can tell some truths and lies. I found the description really creepy, where it sounds like a bunch of like different little kid voices sort of, whispering and talking, trying to, be heard by the players. And what it's also doing, while it might also help, it is trying to lure the player in so that it can attach itself to the player. But what I like is that this is not just, an ooze that's just trying to get attached to you and then it's just going to burn you and that's it. It is literally going to attach itself to your muscle fibers and your nerve endings. It will actually give you some bonuses as this Whispering Mycelium armor, which I think is incredibly cool. You can't really rip it off. Like you can try, but it will kill you. You have to use magic to get it off, and it becomes more of an issue that you are probably stuck with this for at least the adventure. And essentially what this mycelium wants to do is that it just wants to spread. So like it will look for, after this adventure, if you do keep it, if you do like it, for, the benefits it does give you, because you don't need to eat or drink with it. It just sucks out the nutrients from, the natural organic life around it. But one thing that you'll do, that if you do like walk into town, it might try to force you to, touch like, a random farmer or like the innkeeper so that it can really, grow. It doesn't really want you to like, go onto the wizard or, your anybody in your party, because a lot of them will be, resistant, or they'll be strong enough to, destroy it or deal with it if it becomes that much of an issue. But, it essentially wants you to be like its plague bearer into different towns so that you can just sort of help it spread everywhere. And basically what will happen is that if you do touch somebody while it's on you, it will split in half, and half of it will go onto that creature, and then it'll sort of just like reform on you. So yeah, it's pretty fucked up. It's a pretty gross little thing. The idea of it sort of just like squirming underneath your clothes and armor and just attaching itself straight to your nerve endings is just really horrid. And also on top of that, I think the art that was drawn for it was really good. I also just love this guy's face, just like, oh, as these sort of attach themselves to the nerve endings. And what I like about the art too is that if you do look at the actual pieces that are attaching to him, they do kind of look a little bit like a nerve network there already. Like it looks like they're sort of squirming around trying to find, where the nerves and muscles are, versus like the actual kind of more curtainy look that is like on the wall there. So I think it's a very nice little detail, and also just very fucked up. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about was the barricade in Area B4. And this one I just like because I'm a fan of a bit more dynamic dungeon encounters. This is a very simple room, but I do like that there is a little bit of a goal, and there is enough of a dynamic aspect to it that there is a target and there is some information the players can be given to try and see how they want to deal with this. So in this room, there are these what are called fungal crocari, and the crocari are the mutated cave crickets that have been, eating the big mushroom demon thing. And so these ones are like even, further gone. They've sort of sacrificed their bodies. These are like almost like, I'm not gonna say the honor guard, but are very much like, these ones are like the really devoted ones who've given everything over to Mycelorax, which is the big sort of mushroom demon. Basically what's happening in this room is that these crocari are trying to get into some sort of barricade. They're trying to break through it, and they're using a big sort of ram made of mushrooms, which is also an enemy, so that when you do trigger the fight in this room, I mean, if you do end up triggering the fight, which I assume you'll want to, it will also sort of sprout legs like kind of like a stick bug and also be part of the combat. So I think it's a pretty cool encounter because you have, firstly, two different kinds of pretty horrifying monsters to deal with, but also they are currently trying to break open a barricade, which will give the players a reason to be like, okay, why are they doing that? There must be something inside there that they want. Maybe it's people, or maybe it's, trying to get through somewhere, but since they seem to be running this place, why is there, a barricade that they are trying to get through? So that adds an extra element of like, oh, we need to stop this before they get through the barricade. Also, how are we going to deal with all these different people? If we're a smaller group, or we've already lost people in this group already trying to, get here, there might be some pretty tense debate as to what to do about it. The other thing too is that because they are using this fungal ram to try and break open the barricade, the players will be aware of these enemies before they are aware of the players, so that also gives them some extra time to actually try and, debate and talk about what they're going to do next, with still a timer that, if they take too much time trying to talk through it, that they might break open that barricade. It is a very simple room, but I have found so many times that those simple rooms can end up so crazy and so fun and just so out there, because whatever is happening, from bad rolls or whatever the player, makeup is, where they might have some crazy spells or are really, really bad, things can go bad really quickly, or they can get really crazy really quickly. So I'm always a fan of rooms like this where there's like just a few extra elements that have been added to make it a little bit more interesting than just, a room full of guards or, a room full of goblins that are just eating. I think it adds an extra layer that can make things a little bit tense if there's a bit of a, ticking time bomb of trying to get here before the barricade goes down, and also dealing with what looks like some pretty gross creatures. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that one because I like that one quite a bit as just a good, solid, simple setup for a fight. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about isn't a room. It's actually just a magic item that I just thought was so fucking cool. And honestly, the art for it is probably the main reason why I want to talk about it. I just think it looks so cool. The Veil of Madness being draped over this person and them looking like they're either in, agony or derangement or even maybe ecstasy. Just something that makes me very uncomfortable but looks so cool. I just really wanted to highlight this just because I love that art and I think it's just really, really cool looking. The magic item itself is also very cool. I'll just read it out here for you. The Veil of Madness is a dark, flowing fabric with an ever-shifting pattern of chaotic symbols and colors. It appears to be woven from the ethereal strands of thread that wriggle as though alive. When worn, the veil clings to the face and body of the wearer, obscuring their features and emanating an unsettling aura. This aura induces feelings of unease, confusion, and irrationality in those nearby. Against an enemy that is susceptible to such illusions, the wearer gains a +1 to their AC. In addition, the veil affords partial immunity from the effects of madness and attempts to control or manipulate the wearer's mind. They receive +1 on the dice chain to all saving throws to resist fear and charm effects and to see through illusions. And they also get some extra dark vision. And one thing I like a lot too is the last part on the Veil of Madness, which is essentially that it will drive you crazy over time, but I like how it's not overly mechanized. It just sort of tells you that, like, from a narrative sense, that is what's going to happen. And the reason why I think that works is that I prefer that to them saying, if you use this 5 times, you lose 1 will, or, if you use this 10 times, you need to make a save, or, whatever it is. It says every time you use it, you do start to go a little bit crazier, and I think that's a good time to work with the player as to what that means. So I like that a lot, and of course I love the art, and I just think it's overall just a very cool magic item. So outside of that, there are rooms with puzzles, there are rooms with, usual combat, exploration, all those kinds of things. There's a lot of things here that you've seen before that are done pretty well. I don't really have too many criticisms, honestly. I think, like, there's nothing here that I don't want to just look for ones that I go, like, this is bad and, like, this needs to change or anything like that. I think, like I mentioned before, that overall I like things to be a little bit shorter, but I don't think that's really a problem with this adventure. I think that's just sort of like the DCC style that I don't like. I think as far as I've seen them done, this one does it totally fine. So I don't really have any huge complaints with that. I think overall it does a pretty good job of explaining things. It does a pretty good job of, just making sure you know what you're doing. I think one thing I'll say, and I don't know how much of this is actually really a criticism as much as it's just, the nature of kind of labyrinthian dungeons. I did find at times while I was reading it that I was kind of lost as to where the players were supposed to be. So I do recommend that if you do have this in PDF form, maybe screenshot the map and just have it like on a second monitor so you can look at the map for reference as you read through this. So you can sort of be like, oh, okay, that's where it is. Okay. Because a lot of times I had to scroll down and be like, oh, that's where they are. Okay. I was a little bit confused as to where they were here and there, which isn't too much of an issue, when reading through it. By the table, you might be like, oh, fuck, where is this? Oh, there it is. And it's not even that big of a dungeon. It's a very nice map. I think it does a very good job of being pretty easy to read, and there's not too much going on in terms of like, oh, this is like really overwhelming. It's just because of the nature of it, being a cavern system, that sometimes that can be a little bit confusing as to where they are. But that's pretty much everything for me for this, guys. I do really want to run it so I can get a proper idea of how it actually runs. And if I ever do that, I'll probably like do a mention of it like in a Bun Games episode, because that's usually where I just do little game reports and stuff like that. So if I ever get around to actually running this, because I would like to, I'll probably do like a little episode or part of an episode on that. But outside that, yeah, I recommend it. I think it's very cool. I think the art's really cool. I think it's well written. I think the adventure is fun. I think it's also just good to, I think this is their first time publishing an adventure for Dark Star Adventures. So, it's always nice to, even if you just get the PDF, it's good to support smaller creators, and also with everything like the crazy tech bro idiots who, see no value in, creators and artists and everything. I think now more than ever, it's good to actually, give money and support people who are actually writing, actually creating, actually making their own art and everything. So I absolutely recommend it, not just for those reasons, but also because of those reasons. But I think it's a very fun little adventure. I also want to say a big thanks to my patrons. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for all your generosity. If you want to become a patron, you get videos a day early. You get to vote sometimes on what videos I'm going to do. You get also access to the patron channel in the Discord, as well as a purple name, and I think a few other things that I can't remember off the top of my head that are pretty minor. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a good one, and stay safe out there.